right. We are here with episode 12, and we got a good one for you guys tonight. So those of you that have watched our Is a Pet Retic Right For You did an amazing job with watching that episode, and you guys decided that a pet retic is right for you. So today is going to kind of be a follow-up to that. Now you've bought in your first retic. What do you do in terms of when this animal gets home? All that good stuff. So we're going to answer some questions that a lot of beginners tend to ask. Again, thank you so much for supporting the Retic Lounge. Go ahead and like, comment, and subscribe on YouTube. And if you're listening on Apple Music Apple Podcasts or Spotify, go ahead and follow, like, and rate those episodes. Let us know what you guys think. We love to read those reviews and appreciate everyone's positive feedback so far. So Nathan, I think it's fair that we actually no. I feel like we definitely need to include our support USARK blurb. So why don't you go ahead and talk about USARK?
Yeah, I was gonna say I don't know why you're getting so ready for this episode. I mean, I'm ready too, but no, we gotta make sure that we're supporting USARK. Become a member today. Member numbers are always the most important thing to show our legislators. So go ahead, become a member, and
yeah. Did you say go ahead and become a legislator, or am I zoned out?
No. I would rather you become a member of USARK, please.
Don't be a legislator. Don't be one of those snakes.
Hey, unless you're a reptile keeping, retic keeping legislator who's gonna fight just as hard for us, then. No, I want to before we jump into this. I mean, as we jump into this, before we get to that snake arriving at your doorstep, what do you need to have in place?
Yeah, I mean, so number one, like two different type of buyers, right? You're either going to go to a show and you're going to buy an animal that you had intentions on buying, right? Because after you watch Is a Pet Retic Right For You, you're no longer impulse buying retics. And then, so you're either buying from a show and you're bringing it home in a bag or tub, and you are also either buying a snake and it's coming to you in a box. So, first off, like, what am I doing when that box gets to me or when I get home? I'm like thoroughly inspecting that snake, right? I'm going to kind of look up and down in case I missed anything at the show or brought home mites. I always just want to do a quick body scan of the animal. I'll even like feel the side or feel like within its belly while it's crawling around. You want to make sure that, so for those of you that are getting like your first shipment, I always recommend like have your temp gun ready. And
I want to add a caveat to this. When you get your first shipment, especially if it's your first reptile shipment, make sure you're on top of that shipment. You're tracking it. You know when it's arriving at your house. You're not leaving it outside for it to get too cold, too warm.
I actually as a breeder myself that sold a clutch last year, I did not send any to addresses. I always shipped to a local hub. If I ever run into a issue where someone lives,
we saw that a lot with COVID, where that's what our only option was.
Ship to house.
Honestly, it made it a lot better for a lot of us because we weren't running into some of those issues.
Yeah.
Now we were still running into the same issues of stuff being stuck at hubs, but that's a whole other
exactly. So number one, if the breeder you're getting it from and you're buying online isn't on top of the weather and shipping conditions, don't expect them to be aware of that. A good breeder is going to be fully aware of that and keep you posted on when they can send animals, but don't think that it is fully their responsibility, because at the end of the day, you're the one spending money. So make sure that you're on top of that. I recommend going to shipyourreptiles.com, where they will include a shipper's insurance when it is safe to send an animal, which means that they will insure it based off of there not being any holdups at any kind of hubs, anything like that. But anyway, so you get this box and you've been tracking it. You either get it at the hub or you go home, have a temp gun and temp the inside of the box. That's the first thing I would recommend doing, making sure that your snake is either not overheated. If I'm temping the box and it is cold, I'll let my snake gradually heat up before I put it in its rack on 88 degrees of a hot spot. Just because I don't want to shock the animal. I'll let it heat up in room temp. Um, so I guess kind of take us into the rest of that. You knew where I was going with that in terms of looking at
Well,
the animal.
I'll add on to that too, because as a breeder shipping to another breeder, when I shipped my babies out, that was the first and last thing that we started with. So got the package ready, got all of my heat packs ready because it was still a little bit cool out. Set up the box like the receiver had asked, and took temps before I put any tubs or any deli containers containing babies into the box. Took temperatures before I wrapped everything up, sent it out, and then the first thing I got after hours and hours of a sleepless night, I got a picture with the box in Pittsburgh and all the temps inside the box as well. So yeah, that's probably the most
Yeah.
important thing. Make sure that your snake is at a good temperature, and if it's too cool, let it acclimate a little bit before you just throw it right onto a hot spot like Lucas
Yeah.
was saying.
When you shock an animal's body like that, it's kind of the same aspect of like, um, if you're like running and you're really hot and you just had a crazy workout indoors and then you went outside and you went into like freezing temperatures, your body would kind of not adjust well. It would probably be in shock a bit, and so you don't want to just shock your animal.
Well, for warm-blooded animals, that's fine. That's great for your body. Cold-blooded, not so much. They can't regulate the same
True.
way. So, like, yeah, well, while we can go straight from a sauna right into an ice bath and throw it back and forth, it's not as
Yeah.
good for them as
Yeah.
it is
I guess
us.
the point that I was trying to make is that you wouldn't want to be exposed to those extremes. Don't do it for your animal, especially with a snake that cannot regulate its body temperature, besides maybe increasing its temperature by a little bit. So, I'm going to look and inspect that snake. And because here's the thing is that if anything happens to your snake on that shipment, um, you probably have just a 24-hour window to take a picture of that animal and to send it to the breeder and to claim, hey, my snake destroyed its face, or hey, I noticed a kinked tail, or hey, I noticed A, B, and C. And so you definitely want to make sure that you are inspecting that animal and letting the breeder know if that animal came in with any issues that were not visible in any pictures.
I need to add on something there as well. One thing I've seen in the retic community and people just getting into retics, receiving their first baby animal in the mail, is a lot of these snakes in the bags or whatever container they're in will push and rub like a retic will do. And I've seen a lot of buyers get very upset at a retic coming in the mail with a little bit of rub or a scab on its head. Maybe my best looking snake, um, she came to me with a little bit of bag rub coming in the mail, and she didn't have it beforehand. I had pictures, and it just, from everyone I talked to who uh, like was helping me get into retics, they're like, it's no problem. Wait for it to shed a couple times, it'll be gone. So I just, sorry about that. I hit my space bar and it muted me. I just never worried about it, and followed the advice I was given, let it go through a couple shed cycles, and bam, it's gone. Looks like it never
Yeah,
happened.
retigs are completely resilient. They'll push, they'll have little scabs after a shed or two. They're gone, so that's not the end of the world. But clearly, if you unbox an animal that looks nothing like the one you pictured buying, and it or has something really severe on the body, or something's out of whack, you have about 24 hours to make your seller aware of those issues in order to have any hopes of um, uh, repairing, either getting a replacement, sending it back, whatever the case may be. Um, so do your due diligence with that part. So,
Now, Lucas, uh, what have you seen over the years as maybe a realistic issue of something arriving in the mail that you actually would want to be concerned about?
um, I mean, so number one, I know of an incident that recently happened that someone bought a pair of pure Calatoas, and there was one pure Calatoa, and then one was a Motley. So that's clearly something that you want to be aware of. Send a picture to the seller. But in terms of like health issues, so like
Yeah, yeah. I mean, obviously, misidentification is something you should know right away when opening the bag. You should have pictures of the animals that are
yeah,
coming to you, so you should be able to identify your
yeah,
snake. But yeah, I'm talking mostly health issues that you've seen over the
okay.
years.
I have one
Um,
that happened to me.
big things that come to mind. Yeah, big things that come to mind for me are just like malnourished animals or just dehydrated animals, that kind of thing.
Yeah. So I had an instance that I was shipped an animal and it came to me with like a massive tail. I'm trying to show size. Came with a thick tail. Here I am again.
Lucas's
So
shapes, everyone.
had a really really thick tail, like it hadn't Peter pooped in like weeks and weeks, and it was just super huge. That number one is a sign of dehydration. When that happens, the internal the intestines and things inside are dry, they're not properly lubricated, and so getting any urates or any feces out is hard and painful for them, and it builds up. So things like that's what I've experienced. Number two is any Nathan hit it, any malnourished, if it comes in thin and you see skin that you can like pinch and fold, those are signs of an animal that wasn't properly cared for prior to it getting to you, unless you and the breeder have disclosed
Don't
otherwise.
But don't get that confused for a
Yeah,
shed
yeah, yeah,
either, because sometimes right as they're going into a shed, you'll have those folds. Looks like you can pinch
yeah,
them a little bit, especially as they're
yeah,
bigger. But yeah, I think the next thing that really comes to mind is mites. Like, have your animal out, have it in a quarantine enclosure. I think we should jump into a little bit about quarantines after this, but uh, observe that animal for a little bit and really look at it, make sure that the health of it looks good. It's moving around its enclosure, it's drinking, and then just visually observe the health
yeah.
of the animal, like Lucas said.
Why don't we actually jump into quarantine right now since you mentioned it, because I think that's important, and then afterwards we'll jump into having an enclosure, things like that ready. So in terms of like quarantine method, so like what do you do for quarantine? What is quarantine, first of all?
So quarantine is getting that snake as separated as possible from the rest of my collection. So setting up a temporary tub with some heat tape somewhere, a thermostat to make sure that heat tape's running properly, and just setting it away from the rest of my stuff. Um, I've only really had three animals come in since I got my original two. My original two, I'll admit, I didn't have much of a quarantine process with them. All my stuff was in the living room and just kind of threw it into a brand new
Yeah.
enclosure. So lucked out that just was working with good people.
Yeah, and I mean, I'll comment on that. Like, I'm gonna remove it. So, like, right now, all of my snakes are in my garage. If I need to quarantine, they go upstairs. I have like a area upstairs where I can set up a sterile type of enclosure. But I haven't bought an animal from someone that I don't know for a very long time or don't trust. So my quarantine method isn't as like, there's some people that'll quarantine an animal for 6 months. I mean, if you're like in the green tree python, emeralds, or basin community, um, that like any little health issue could be the detriment to your entire collection. Quarantine as long as you're comfortable for and as long as you have the space and you feel fully confident to introduce it into your collection. I was talking to MJ at Arlington, and MJ was like no, I don't risk anything. Like if an animal like just barely looks sick, you
Yeah.
gotta make sure that you keep it away. But so for me, I
Well, and it all depends really what you're working with, right? So I mean, we're very very lucky. Retics are extremely hardy animals, and even if you were to bring a retic in with some health issues, let's say it spreads, um, I think the worst thing I could think of is Nido, but I haven't heard of a ton of Nido spreading through retic
I mean,
collections.
IBD is potentially even worse.
IBD.
And
Yeah.
yes, retics can get IBD.
Can you break down IBD for people who may not know?
IBD is, I mean, why not actually Google the full name that I'll probably choke. Um, but IBD is a virus that is, it attacks our central nervous system and causes
Hmm.
like tremors, shaking, and a bunch of issues that ultimately detrimentally, can kill your snake and can actually be extremely deadly to your collection. If the thing about IBD that's crazy is that it's most known in being in boas, and boas show signs of it and they'll die, but um, retics and other pythons can completely have IBD and not show signs or symptoms of it. And so if you have IBD in your collection, or if you don't know you do, you might never know and your snakes might never die from it. Or one day you might have something showing signs of IBD and it could wipe out your collection in no time. While I Googled it, inclusion body disease. There, that's what it is. So
We can just throw that
right, for
up there
people
for.
that are inclusion body disease. Another very typical symptom of IBD is constant regurgitation and throwing up. So if your snake is vomiting over and over again after every time that you feed it a meal, you should probably get it checked out and tested. But yeah, so with retics, as far as my quarantine method is I'll typically do a um, if getting the animals from people I trust 4 to 6 weeks just to make sure that if there are mites, I'm taking care of that there's no sign of RI. If there's no RI and there's no mites, and after 4, 6, because the mite cycle is typically every 2 to 3 weeks or something like that, right? Like you should definitely see eggs hatch within a month if you've had your animal there. I'm pretty sure.
Yeah.
Um,
No, and during this time, like you're checking, you're leaving them, like you said, 4 to 6 weeks in that quarantine. Um, are you hands on with them at all? Are you just watching them? Are you observing them? Are you gonna just what
I
do you
mean,
think?
for me, if I am hands on with a quarantine animal, it's the only animal that I'm holding within that time frame. I'm not going to go hold this animal, go inspect it, look at it, do that, and then go straight into my room, my snake garage, and then work with the rest of my animals. Um, if I don't see signs of stress, if I don't see signs of defensiveness or anything like that, or I don't see any signs of sickness, I'm okay handling it as long as it's eating. But for the most part, in quarantine, I mean, especially if you have an animal that comes in underfed or looking underweight or anything like that, just feed it, take it out when cleaning. You'll get plenty of time to be able to love on your animal and show it off. But if you see signs of sickness and it's in quarantine, just be mindful of that. Let it rest, let it get well, hydrate it, feed it, you know, a vet visit.
Reach out to people, figure out what's going on, and
Yeah.
then deal with it accordingly. Um, and then one thing you brought up is, you're not going right from that quarantine enclosure, handling that animal to uh, the rest of your collection. Now, I think I forget this a lot of the time. Being a barber, just it's just second nature, but cross contamination is maybe the number one sin you can commit under the state board's eye. So, I mean, you're always washing your hands, you're always disinfecting your tools, you're always making sure that nothing from any other living organism is going to get on the next living
Yeah.
organism.
And for those of you that like, so respiratory infections, one of the more common things that happen in retics and snakes in general are respiratory infections. That is a bacterial infection. It's an infection that impacts the respiratory system, their lungs. So if you're using hooks, if you're using any type of feeding tongs and tools on an animal with a respiratory infection and you don't disinfect it, or you don't have a separate set for the other animals and you decide to start handling your snakes with that same tool, you run the risk of spreading a bacterial infection that can impact the snake's respiratory system, which is not good. So again, I mean, and this goes for your own animal in quarantine. If let's say you're not getting a new animal, but you now have a snake with a respiratory infection, if you have the means and ability to separate it from your collection, get it away from the other ones just to make sure that you're isolating that infection and treating it instead of it potentially being exposed to the rest of your collection.
And then, yeah, and handling, make sure as long as that animal's eating, drinking, looks okay. I mean, even if it doesn't, you should be getting hands on with that animal and being as observant as possible so you know the health of that animal. So, uh, beyond that, you're acclimating that animal to just your routine, your handling methods, all of that. So make sure you're handling your animal during that first month during their quarantine, and then watch your cross contamination, I'd
Yeah.
say.
And, of course, if, you have been a responsible Retic buyer and you've bought your first Retic, um, you should have a enclosure set up prior to the animal getting there with the accurate heat, right? What are
Absolutely.
your thoughts on that? Because I oftentimes, like, people thought I was crazy when I was telling friends, like when I was selling to people that I didn't know that didn't keep retics. Um, I actually had one buyer ask me if I was serious when I asked him to see, like, yeah, do you have an enclosure set up? Do you have an extra thermostat? Like, I was asking him questions like, I'm about to send my very first clutch that I've ever been able to sell to people. These are my babies, and I'm sending it to someone. Like, yeah, I'm sorry. I want to know if you have the means to keep this animal alive when it reaches you.
Yeah, I mean, going into my first year, that's probably my number one priority. I mean, uh, I've only seen a handful of examples in my 7 years of keeping retics, or 6 years, whatever it's been. Um, but I have seen a couple times where people just get enamored by retics or super dwarfs or what have you, and I see them start to get a handful of them. Um, I see cohabbing. I see them set up in, tubs like you would use for cleaning. And not to say that you can't set up a temporary quarantine enclosure in one of those tubs, but I think realistically, if you're trying to keep something like a retic, you need to be looking at real enclosures and have something like that be just purely
Yeah.
temporary.
I will say we'll probably do an episode down the road versus like an episode of like tub versus enclosure style. What's
Oh,
appropriate? I think that
absolutely.
would be a really good discussion. But I just want to give my 2 cents on um, like using a tub with your first retic.
Now, are you talking tub
Not a
as
rack.
in like hatchling? Okay,
Not a
not a
hatchling
hatchling
rack,
rack,
not a
nothing like that.
V18, not a
That's
V35.
that's what I thought you were referring to, so I'm just making sure we're on
Yeah,
the
so
same
like
page.
I'm talking about like a 28 quart weather tote tub. That's about like um
Yeah,
I actually like I I really like those when you're getting like your first retic or something, because what's cool is that they're opaque, so it's not glass and fully transparent. You can put normal bedding on the bottom. You can go ahead and you can put plenty of enrichment, hides, a bunch of fake plants in there. Yes, thank you. He got one. Exactly. Those are actually, that was the one I had my Coyote in. And I know that a lot of new retic keepers are doing a phenomenal job with getting amazing enclosures for even their babies. But I'm totally down for the first 4 to 6 months of your snake's life, as long as you are responsible and are already purchasing its next enclosure. Okay, this isn't like I'm gonna buy a retic on a budget and then buy a tub on a budget. But those tubs are amazing because you could put the sticky little fake plants on there. You can put a bunch of hides, and that snake could literally feel like it's in a jungle. And I think they're actually phenomenal. I kept my first like 3 4 retics when I got them for the first like 4 to 6 months I had them. They were all in those, and they were all super sociable, not shy, never struck at me, and they seemed to like it.
yeah. And it forces a different kind of interaction when you're pulling them out. You can pull that tub
Yep.
up, put it on a counter, whatever you need to do. There's a little bit of motion right before you get them out. That's yeah. There's definitely some benefits that I see there. I think it's just the OCD or whatever in me that just I want to have them set up in a
Oh, me
nice
too.
enclosure. I want them looking
Me,
pretty.
me, no, I agree. Me too. If you can go the enclosure route, like by all means do it, enrich it, make it beautiful. But I see a lot of people like on the Facebook pages that have these elaborate plastic totes that have beautiful foliage and cover, and it looks phenomenal for a baby retic. And I see a lot of people
Oh, yeah.
shaming them and saying you should be getting that snake in enclosure. And it's like, I get it.
Bottom line is, as long as it's set up, has heat, that heat is regulated, it is secure within inside the enclosure, I think you are doing
Yeah.
just
It,
fine. I would say just have a plan to upgrade
yeah.
that
ASAP.
eventually.
Like the moment your snake gets there, most major manufacturers of PVC cages are on a 4 to 6 month wait. So you better be ready to pull that trigger. Um,
And sometimes when they say 6 months, it'll be
yeah,
seven to
we're
eight.
not going to mention any names here, but um,
Nope.
yeah. So always plan ahead and plan accordingly, because you guys, of course, have watched Is a Pet Retic Right for You, so you know all this stuff. Um, so I mean, like even during quarantine or when it's with the rest of your collection, let's be more specific here. How frequent do you handle any new snake that you have?
Like I said, as long as it's eating, drinking, shows signs of good health, I'm going to be handling that snake as much as possible. Now, if it's in poor health, which I haven't run into yet, luckily, I think my plan would be to handle that animal, document as much as possible, get advice from mentors, especially the seller of that animal, and then address issues from there. Um, Handle, if possible, if the issue is something where the animal can still be hands on. But yeah, I think that's general
Yeah.
guidelines. But going out of that, because you're still within your quarantine process during this time, you just got your new retic, it's in quarantine, you're maybe handling it. When are you feeding it?
Ooh, okay, that's a good question because I feel like, for other species, ball pythons and such, that are known for being picky, finicky eaters at times, and so a lot of people have this idea of like, wait 2 weeks, right? I hear that all the time, and even sometimes with retics, like, give it a week or two to acclimate. Um, if you get a snake that's healthy and it's coming to you lively and it's healthy, I fed a retic the same day before and it's eaten. I've waited a week before and it's eaten. So really the way that I determine that is I'll ask the seller, when was its last meal? That's always good to know. If you're getting that first retic, try to ask the seller if they have the last 3 times it ate, just so that you have that record.
My first retic that I ever got, I got, I mean, it was a hatchling, but I believe I got at least its last 3 or 4 meals and its first shed on a card.
Yeah, that's awesome. I didn't do that with my first, but I wish I would have. I texted them that information, but I think now that I'm going to be getting an ARS rack for my hatchlings and I'm going to be clipping a pin to it with an index card, I'm just going to send the index card with the baby. I think that's the easiest thing to do. But what I did was I documented all that on my phone and I sent it off with the people who bought them. I would just say like, here's the documentation. Here's the first 5 meals. Here's when it shed. But that's huge. So, some breeders are going to include all that information, and if you have it, that's great. But so with me, I'm not worried about when am I feeding my retic. Like like I said, I fed the same day before, and it would take it. I haven't had a retic that I got ever deny its first meal with me. So what I typically do is I put it in its tub, and then the next day that I'm feeding the collection, um, within that week is when I just decide to offer it food.
I've even had a picky male come in that I tried to offer a small rabbit to, maybe even a rabbit kit. Can't remember, but for whatever reason, he just didn't like the scent of it. Um, so contacted the breeder, found out he was eating rat pups or something maybe a little bit bigger, and switched over to rats the next day and he
Yeah.
took it. So sometimes it's just a matter of what you're trying to feed him
Yeah.
as well.
So yeah, that the whole question of asking like when should I feed my retic after getting it, like just offer it food. It's these aren't ball pythons or other shy species. They're actually the most enrichment you can give a reticulated python is feeding it. That's literally what it loves the most is eating. So go ahead and feed it. And I'm almost inclined to say, and this isn't the case with every animal, so this isn't like a black and white statement that I'm making, but I'm almost inclined that if a retic is refusing food, it's for like the only like valid good reason a retic's refusing food is if one, it's in shed and doesn't like to eat in shed, or two, it's cycling and breeding. Any time outside.
Or it's just young and
Well,
scared.
yeah, I mean, especially when you're trying to get animals acclimated. But yeah, retics are generously, if a breeder has an animal eating 3 to 5 times when you get it, there's a good chance that it's going to eat for you. If it doesn't, give it some more time. But I wouldn't be too worried about like when should you. You don't have to wait like a whole 2 week period. Just offer it food. If it doesn't eat, give it a few more days. Maybe add some more hides in there, and try again.
Well, and this is a great time to point out our feeding episode.
Yeah.
I mean, it goes hand in hand with getting your first retic. Yeah, you maybe want to, like, especially if it's a defensive flighty animal, you maybe want to wait a day or two to acclimate. But after that, as long as you can get that animal started on food, should follow somewhat of those guidelines or whatever the people you trust are saying.
Yeah, I agree. And I mean, um, if you guys have your own opinion on this, go ahead and just comment down below. Like add to the community, add to the discussion. We love hearing opposing views and views that are similar to ours, and it provides those that are looking at the comments some information. So in terms of how you quarantine, in terms of when you feed with a new animal, give us your input. We love to see it. Um, so okay, you have a snake in quarantine or it's out of quarantine. We talked about feeding already, but like the big question that I see often is like, when should I start hook training? When should I be using a hook? When what do you have to say about that?
I'm trying to find a way to draw this out and not be so short and sweet with it.
We could be short and sweet.
But I feel like I kind of have to because, yeah, that's the only way. So with the hooks, I start my animals right away, but that's just because I want them to be in a routine from day one. I want them to expect a similar experience every time I go to feed, to clean, whatever I need to do with the animal. I want them to expect a certain kind of experience every time
Yeah.
I go in. Not to say that you won't have a certain animal that no matter what you do won't respond to that, but those are far and
Yeah.
few in between.
Retics are very, very, very good at making association. And what I mean by that is like, um, the very first retic I got, when I feed her, I tap the enclosure, doom, 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 and you'll see her literally just me going boom, boom. I actually stopped doing it because she would make the association when I tap 3 times, 1, 2, 3, she'd freaking lunge at the freaking glass and smack her face on there. And I don't even have food to offer just yet. So
Yep.
retics are very, very, very much easy to train in a sense of like, if you have a routine with the animal's going to be more likely to associate when it's handling time, when it's feeding time. But yeah, I guess my response is that is like, I know there's like a culture in the ball python community that is like, oh, you use a hook for your ball python, just man up. Like everyone like frowns upon that. And I know that there's people that like,
There's people in the retic
yeah,
community too. I mean, people have seen it in person. I'm a wimp even with the hatchlings. I don't love
yeah,
getting bit.
it's not fun. But aside from just like also not wanting to be bit, even though if it's by a hatchling and it's not going to hurt, it's going to scare you more than it's going to hurt you. Um, I go back to what I've said in previous episodes. For me, it's a matter of complacency. Once I think I have the confidence to reach in and grab an animal, whether it's a baby or whether it's an adult, is when the one day there's going to be a mistake that you get bit. So I always say if you're going to use a hook with an adult retic, which you absolutely 100% positively should, um,
Yeah, especially if you don't have
yeah,
someone around
or
to
and
help.
if I mean, or a hook equivalent. I know a lot of people use paper towel. Use a paper towel, whatever you can to break the feed response of your animal. Um, I mean, why not start while they're really young? I mean, if you decide one day to just like with your 2-year-old retic that you never used a hook to go in and try to use a hook, it's probably going to try to eat the hook because it's never seen a hook before. Um, so I don't know. For me, like I'm going to use a hook and I'm not using the hook to like drag the babies out. I'm not saying do that. Just rub it, tap it, then pick up with your hands. Give it the association that, oh, when this idiot touches my head with a weird looking object, I'm going to be picked up instead of fed.
No, I'll add a caveat to that because I did have a flighty male hatchling that, the female I could go in, rub its head, get control of its body, and then we're good to go. The male, he was just squirmy, and even when you would tap him on the head, he would run to the other side of the enclosure. Sometimes, like if you're dealing with an animal like that, yeah, you can control a little bit of the first third of its body, try to get it moving and in control, realize that things aren't so
Yeah.
bad, and then
Yeah.
get that snake out of the
And I mean,
enclosure.
we could talk about retic behavior as well later in another episode. Again,
And it's almost better with visual aids. I mean, we can talk about it all
we'll
day,
include
but
some videos
I mean,
that would be
visual
good too.
aids.
But one thing that I want to mention is that, me and Nathan are very, very big advocates of using hooks almost all the time. I We are also both fully aware that if you know your animal, there's breeders and keepers out there that know their animals and can pick it up and do different things. And I'm not saying the way that we do it's the only way to do it. I'm just saying for safety purposes, because the one day that you think you are reading your snake's behavior and you accidentally wake it up and scare it, and it decides to think that you're food. You just don't want that to happen with a snake that can get relatively large. And even if it's a baby, anytime that snake bites you because it's fearful or it's a food response bite and you either have to pinch the tail or spray Listerine in its mouth to get it off you, you now have a negative interaction with that animal. And those animals remember negative interactions like, I mean, their memory is great. They will not forget a bad interaction.
Retics, yeah, they definitely, once they have some bad interactions, they can definitely hold on to it. But I also think they're uh, reward based
Yeah.
as well. So as long as you're taking care of them well and you have good interactions after that, and you have some
Oh,
consistency after
they're
that,
forgiving.
I've I've had yeah, I've had a food bite and then a defensive bite from one of my girls, and you know, even though she's smaller and everything, because of those interactions, I just work a little
Yeah.
slower with her and give her time to realize what's
I guess a
happening.
good example for me to kind of, so I have Halmaharas right now that are very defensive, and I started building a really good positive relationship with the female to the point where I could get her out with the hook and I can hold her. And as long as I was slow and steady with her, she would never strike me. One day, one of my helpers, not one of my helpers, my helper, Sean, shout out to Sean. He's a Patreon member and he comes out and helps me. He's awesome. Man, we haven't even brought up Patreon today. What are we doing? Go join.
Well, I was going to say with that video content, Lucas and I are extremely busy with the podcast itself. So providing all the extra stuff, especially working with our collections, we provide that mostly within the
Yeah.
Patreon community. Not to be stingy, but we just are just working full time jobs, doing the podcast, also trying to film on top of taking care of our
And a
collections.
personal
So
life. Like,
you know, become a lounger today, and we're not trying to hold this out for the highest tier or anything like that. Join us, and you can see us working
yeah.
with our animals.
So back to my Halmahera story, I was working with her and getting her confidence up, and then he took her out and he had her, and she was just laying very, very still, like not budging at all. And
That's when
and
I
and
get
so it
nervous.
was really weird. And so I cleaned up her tub while he's holding her, and he's like, she's wrapping me pretty tight. And at the time I didn't think anything of it. But so I tell him, I'm like, all right, just bring your hand over, go ahead and put her back in the tub. And she starts to like go back into the tub, but is still wrapping with her lower half pretty tight. And so my thought was just like, use your other hand to go ahead and just like get it off and guide it back in there. And he went to do that. And the moment that he did that, she turned around, bit, and constricted. It was like a food response bite. But after
They're very smart about where the end of their
right.
body is. I've noticed anytime I've had any kind of weird sketchy instance like that, I felt the body tense up, I felt the end of the tail wrap tight around me, and then the snake reared
Yeah.
back around coming out of the
Yeah.
enclosure.
And so after that experience of her biting him, every time that I'd open up her tub for the next 2 weeks, she's striking, she's defensive, she's nervous. And it took me 2 weeks to build back up that relationship. So you can definitely build up your relationship with your retics if you have a bad experience with them, but they will definitely remember it for the time being. Going back to circling at that point to explain what I meant by that. Because, yeah, it's definitely much different than an extremely intelligent monitor that is like, no, you are a POS human. Get away from me. Um,
Wait, pause. We're having the same thought. You
yeah.
prepared?
Oh, cheers. So, on that note, when should you start using a hook? I say from day one. Hook, paper towel roll.
Yep.
Just get in the habit
Yep.
of doing it. Don't be complacent. For those of you that don't use a hook, I'm not saying you're dumb or irresponsible. Um, I just hope nothing bad happens to you, and I hope that you can become an amazing keeper that can read your snake's language and be able to open up your snake's enclosure, let the snake read your body, and have this beautiful relationship like I've seen people have. But for me, at the end of the day, I don't ever want to risk a 12-foot snake biting and wrapping me because I decided not to use an extension of my hand first.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then yeah, I mean, so we've let's just talk about real quick and summarize. So got the snake in the mail. We talked about unboxing or unbagging when you get it from a show, quarantining, how frequent should you handle it, um, when should you feed it, um, start using a hook. What else do you think that you want to add to, like, what should people know?
One small thing that I think you missed out on, but I think it's relatively new. But being as I was in Chicago and got to see all the support at the U.S. ARC auction, I think it would be unfair to not mention Redline
Oh yeah,
Shipping, major U.S. ARC supporter. Spent some serious money at the auction and has shaken up the shipping game in the reptile industry quite a bit. I still love Ship Your Reptiles. I think they're a great option. Haven't shipped anything since, but I think both of those are solid options if you're looking to get an
yeah.
animal out.
I actually haven't been on Redline Shipping's website yet to look, but I and the reason why I even mentioned Ship Your Reptiles earlier was just because I know they have that shipper's insurance. So generally speaking, if they include that, it's a good date to ship. Does Redline include that?
Uh, I'm like you. I haven't had the need to ship since Redline has come on the scene. I know their prices are super
Yeah,
competitive. Being in the animal industry, I sure hope that they have some kind of
yeah,
insurance. That's the biggest reason why I go to Ship Your Reptiles. I mean, even though they're not always able to insure my full package, especially when I'm sending out
yeah,
hatchlings, you know, it's at least good to have a tiny bit
yeah,
of peace of mind. Um, Stuff goes wrong in the mail. Like I said earlier in the episode, stuff can get stuck at hubs. Um, if you have a snake coming from someone who really just wants to ship it, even though it's not a totally responsible time, then you just you run into the possibility of that animal getting stuck somewhere and there
yeah,
being issues. I mean, the longer that snake goes without heat or overheats, whatever, is just
yeah,
risking the animal neurologically, just its life in
yeah.
general, all that.
Let me, if you don't mind, we haven't done Lucas's rant of the episode yet. Um,
Ooh,
and
let's
and
do
I,
it.
I actually just this just came to mind as you were speaking, but
So before, when is Adler gonna create us some kind of like overlay that comes down
some graphic.
that's like Lucas
I
rant?
can. I'll
Yeah, I
I'll
don't know.
talk to him about that.
Lucas rant
What minute marker are
time.
we at? We're at about 44 minutes. I'll tell him to look out for it. Right, that'd be awesome. Some like audio coming in. Lucas's rant. Okay. So let's talk about what I want to rant about. You decide to get a pet retic, and a pet retic is right for you, and you're getting your first pet retic. Ask the person that you are buying from what their policy and procedure is. Like, just ask for it, because some might not even have one. Some have a very detailed one. Mine's pretty detailed, but the reason why I ask is because, or I guess the reason why I say this is because you're a buyer. And if you are not happy with the product that you receive for any reason, just voice it. The worst that a breeder can say is deal with it, and then you get to post whatever that you want and put them on blast or do whatever you want. But one thing that I constantly see is people spend $800, $1,000, $500, even $200 on a retic. And what ends up happening is that they get it. They're not happy with the animal because it doesn't look okay, doesn't look the same. There's scarring. There's something wrong with it. And what they do, all they do is they don't say anything. And then they go on Facebook 5 days later and they complain, and they never said anything to the seller to try to make amends. If you're not happy with the animal that you receive, let the seller know ASAP. Um,
So I hate to even bring it up again because I feel like I'm bringing up the same scenario twice in one episode. But I did recently just see a circumstance where someone got a snake with some bag rub, uh, ended up contacting the seller. Seller said, "Hey, it's some bag rub. Should go away in a shed or two. You're totally fine." Buyer wasn't totally happy with it. Went on to the retic communities after telling the breeder that he was going to do so. Breeder was like, "All right, go ahead. You're totally fine to reach out to people," and got the same answer from multiple different people. Um, I urge you to just be
yeah.
open minded. There's people that have been keeping probably longer than you have, especially if you're getting your first, second, third animal. So just be open minded to the fact that if you're getting the same answer from multiple people, you might be getting good information, and just wait
Yeah.
it out. If you're still not happy at that point, then work out an arrangement with the breeder and get your money back, exchange the animal,
Whether
whatever you
and,
need to do.
and some breeders will refund the animal, some breeders will replace the animal, some breeders will tell you send the snake back, and you have credit now towards whatever other animal that you want. But at the end of the day, I guess my rant is about the idea that people are unhappy with the purchase and the animal that they end up receiving, but then they don't say anything until a week or two later, and then expect to try to call the breeder out. But it's, you never made them aware of the issue at hand. And then number two, if you're a breeder and you're selling animals and you're shipping animals out, your reputation is on the line every time you send an animal out. Send an animal out in good health, that's hydrated. Even if you need to wait 2 or 3 weeks to send that animal out, if it didn't have a meal for whatever reason or whatever the case may be, just understand that, like, you're running a business and you are an extension of your business name, and your animal that you send out is a piece of your business. Someone's unhappy with that animal, they're unhappy with you, they're unhappy with your business. So just remember that, because I see a bunch of these people that are sending that are producing 1,000 retic babies a year, or they're mass producing retics, and they send out terrible looking animals, and then they expect it to just be okay, like that, like that's the status quo and norm. Just know that when you're selling animals, it's you're not just selling a retic, you're selling yourself. So for breeders, be more responsible when you send an animal out, and just send a healthy animal. If it's not healthy, be transparent and wait till you get it back to health.
Yeah, and as a buyer, you need to accept the fact that it might not always be the perfect time to have your retic arrive in the mail. I've seen buyers get frustrated over the years of, "Oh, I bought this animal 2 weeks ago, but it hasn't been sent to me yet." Well, it's been 107 degrees throughout the
Right.
country. Yeah, we're no
No,
one's
you
sending
can't
animals.
convince me. You can't say just put it on
We
dry
don't need
ice.
neurological issues or you opening a box with a
No.
dead animal. We don't
Nope.
want that. That hurts us too. Like, even though that animal is sold, that's a piece of us that we put ourselves into
Yeah.
that year. Like
I, I,
it's we're proud of the animals that
I
we produce. Whether it's a wild type or the most expensive animal we sell, it's important to us.
yeah. I was so excited about what I was going to say that I almost interrupted you twice. But yeah,
You're good.
you got to understand, and maybe not all breeders are like this, or maybe this is just because I'm new and I'm not like desensitized to the experience, but like I still call the babies that I produce that now people own, like I still call them my babies. Like they're still my, like I put a lot of work and I'm very proud of them. And so, if you want to complain about me not sending an animal out, it happened during my first experience. Someone was frustrated about me not shipping, even though they had got another animal shipped to them by another breeder. Again, there was backups at certain hubs, and I said, we can wait. Like this is your animal, you've paid for it. I'm paying for its meals. I'm feeding it. I'm cleaning it. I'm watering it. Just I'll send you all the pictures and videos you want. Just sit back, relax, and when the snake that I know is 100% going to get to you okay, I'll send it to you. If not, and you're unhappy, I, you know, I'll be happy to lose a sale if that's the case, but I'll never jeopardize the well-being of an animal. You're on mute. You hit your space bar.
Weird.
You're on a roll.
Yeah, I've been using my space bar all episode, but didn't work for me that time. Damn it. No, I mean, especially as new as we are, I mean, every animal counts, and we're putting ourselves out there. And I think even the big breeders too, especially the ones that are doing it right, you see the same level of care. They care about every
Yep.
single animal that's coming out, being taken to
Yeah.
shows. Like if it has rubbing issues, or if it's not well started or whatever, it's not going to show up at your doorstep or at the
Yeah.
booth at the show.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, buy from someone reputable, but at this point, at this episode, you've already bought your animal. So, Nathan, you got anything else to cover? That was a good rant.
It was a good rant, and we both kind of got in onto it, so it wasn't just Lucas's rant this segment. But no, I think we covered pretty much the basics of what you need to do when you get your first retic. Obviously, jump back to that first episode. Is a pet retic right for you? If you haven't already gone through that, please do. Um, Give us any feedback that you please. Remember, we have our Patreon running, so become a lounger today. We have an awesome Discord channel that's very
27
active.
members deep.
Tons of 27 members. We have awesome ideas, awesome conversations happening all the time. Just really good people over there. Lucas and I need to get a slide or something together thanking everyone because we love our Patreon members so much. Become a US ARC member. Member numbers, like I said, matter more than anything. So make sure you become a member. You're donating when possible, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Have a good morning, good night, good evening whenever you watch this. Thank you for tuning in. See you, everyone. Do you want to do your
Later.
little chair thing? That is so cool. I'm going to like stand up so that it makes it look even more dramatic.